All right, I'd like to thank everybody for joining the webinar today. If you have not received your lunch, please send me a one-off email. This is Josh Marler. I'm going to do a very, very quick overview of 5S Technologies because I know that most of you are very familiar with us. So we'll go ahead and begin now. Today's webinar is around ransomware and how we partner with Veeam. So as you all are familiar, we are a locally based company in Cary, North Carolina. We have over 20 years experience. Forward-thinking engineers and executives. We have a great product line, and we really put everything around always doing the right thing for our customers. If you're familiar with our vision, you know that it is to provide a best-in-breed simplified converged infrastructure to support mission-critical business and applications. Our goals are to increase your productivity, remove complexity, and drive down costs and eliminate risk. Our people is what separates us from other vendors. If you're familiar with us and have worked with us in the past, then you know Jamie Durgan and Walter Scott and Ryan Schmidt, and of course our president and owner, Mike Shook. We have over 20 years experience in consulting, which allows us to reach many different verticals, platforms, and solutions. And the 5S code, which has always been the same ever since it was Strategic Technologies, is always to deliver a value and to do the right thing for our customers. Our process is proprietary. It's a regimented service delivery model. We try to give our customers assurance of expert execution and quality delivery. All of our engineers hold several certifications. We selected companies like Cisco and Citrix because of their leadership in quality products, and that's also why we partner with Tentry and Veeam to provide more focused solutions to growing data center needs like the virtualization and consolidation. Next slide, please, Stu. And with Veeam, we are very selective with our partnership, and we are proud to be a Veeam Pro partner. Both 5S and Veeam share the desire and commitment to provide our customers with the tools and ease of administration and increase resiliency and efficiency with products like Veeam Availability Suite, Veeam Backup and Replication, Veeam Backup Essentials, Veeam One, and Veeam Management Pack for System Center. And we have with us today Stu, who is an engineer with Veeam, who is going to go into an overview about ransomware and what Veeam is doing to combat that. So, Stu, please start. Stu, you can begin now.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Josh.
That's fine.
And
yes, sir.
as I was just saying there, my name is Michael Stuparitz. I go by Stu real quick for short. And we're going to be talking today about how we can actually go out there and prevent and recover from ransomware, right? So combating and defeating ransomware is a pretty lofty goal, something that's probably never going to happen. There'll always be some new iterations with it. But with that design goal of going out there and be able to kind of put up the walls, make sure you have some good prevention, but then being able to go out there and make sure you can recover it from no matter what type of scenario might actually be happening. As far as the agenda, we'll first start talk about ransomware, the bigger picture here, kind of what is ransomware, what different versions have come out, how it's kind of evolved over the past years. We'll talk about how we can go out there and do some remediation and prevention, so what kind of options we have for recovery, what we can do to kind of maybe train our IT staff a little bit better as well to make sure that they are aware of some of the risks of things like phishing emails and scams and things like that. Really at the center of all this conversation is going to be the 3-2-1 rule. A lot of you are probably familiar with this with other backup software, but it is something we always like to reiterate here at Veeam. And kind of last point we'll talk about is endpoint protection. So making sure you also have protection on laptops, desktops, servers, maybe cloud workloads or anything like that as well. So just get started on the bigger picture. What is ransomware? Now, most of you probably already understand what ransomware is, but really ransomware is just any type of malicious software or some sort of malware that's going to come inside and it's going to essentially lock down or encrypt all the files on your computer. Now, once it's gone down and down these files, it's going to ask for some sort of ransom. Typically Bitcoin or typically something like gift cards is what's going to be requested. Encryption is really the key here, though. So in most cases, it's going to use a form of AES encryption, 128, 256, something like that. And they're going to basically use some scareware tactics. They're going to put a timer on there. They're going to say you only have 30 days to go out there and resolve this. So that way you're kind of locked into being able to go out there and make a quick decision. So when you're faced with this scenario, a lot of times people will go out there and pay it. I actually have someone I actually talked to as a Veeam customer not too long ago. They went out there and they paid a $25,000 ransom. That may not sound like a ton of money to some of your companies, but we figure that that could be happening multiple times to multiple companies. These ransomware attacks are really getting what they are looking for. As we take a look at kind of ransomware and how it's actually been growing, obviously huge numbers as far as over the past year. This isn't quite as updated as we might like, but even in 2016, we can see the exponential growth really here of how many ransomware attacks have been happening. And this stuff is real. It's not something to have to worry about or not really kind of have to look into. This is something that you want to make sure that you're aware of. Obviously, this has been going around, first couple tracking in the early 2000s. But now as we look at even just 2016, there's hundreds really of different types of ransomware that are out there. I won't go through all these, but really kind of some of the big ones that have been out there have been the CryptoLocker variants, and WannaCry was a big one here recently as well. So just kind of talking a little bit more about the history of ransomware and kind of where it got started. Believe it or not, it's been around a lot longer than most people give it credit for. The first one was actually in 1989. And essentially, this would go out there and lock down your Windows computer, and then from there, it would demand a ransom. The ransom was fairly cheap, obviously, for what we consider by today's standard, only $189. So pretty low cost, but at that time, that was a good chunk of money for any companies to be looking to pay. But just kind of that paywall type of screen where everything gets locked down. You can't actually do anything until you go out there and either pay for their services to be unencrypted, or you go out there and you do some sort of restore process as well. So something where you have to really consider what your plan of attack is going to be if this does happen to your environment. Some of the more newer ones that we've seen have almost disguised themselves in some new ways. So things like they almost look like they're part of the U.S. government, maybe they're part of the FBI or something like that. They lock everything down, maybe even tell you did something wrong. So it really scares the user into thinking that they're the ones who had some sort of problem. Then you'll see that they're going out there and they're going to be using gift cards. Things like that are going to be untraceable. They want to make sure that they have a way to be able to get their money without having someone to be able to come after them. No sort of repercussions could possibly happen with that. The CryptoLockers, CryptoWalls, those are definitely the most common one. And again, this is a great example of what they actually look like. It gives you a timer, tells you how long you have left, and then from there, they're going to kind of con you into playing them into some Bitcoin or something else that is also the untraceable route there. The newest and kind of one of the most scariest ones that we've seen is actually a new one popping up where it's ransomware as a service. This is where they actually go out there and they're basically looking to get people to distribute their software to additional endpoints. So they will basically come up with a screen, and it'll look just like that last one where it's asking for them to pay a ransom. But the key here is that it's actually going to be ask them that they can either pay the ransom or they can essentially go out there and they can put the ransomware on 5 additional computers. So this is a very interesting kind of component that this adds onto this, where instead of having to actually go out there to pay the ransom, you can simply just infect more computers. So kind of propagating that virus, making sure it reaches out to more endpoints. Maybe those endpoints go out to more endpoints, then they can try and get some of those people to start paying the ransom, collecting on those dues. And so it's a great way for them to go out there and try and affect as many computers as possible. And this is also going to be a big thing to look at as well, because as we look into ransomware, one of the biggest weaknesses that we see in companies is actually just end users, right? They might go out there and they might click on that phishing email. They might click on something that encrypts their own personal laptop. From there, they're going to want to be able to get that data back. It might be some important pictures or family movies or something like that. And they're going to want to go out there and they're going to encrypt whatever computers they can. They'll put this virus wherever it might need to go. So just kind of another thing to keep in the back of your mind, that those types of options are out there for even your end users. And just a couple of quick quotes to kind of give you guys an idea of some of the risks that are out there. One important thing I want to point out here is that it's not just a matter of the companies that have been hacked, but also you have to consider the ones that will be being hacked. There's no way to really kind of sure that you're 100% safeguarded. Everyone could be a target here when it comes to ransomware. You just need to make sure that you're prepared. You want to make sure that you have the ability to go out there and kind of make sure your four walls are as secure as possible. But then if something does come in, we want to make sure that we have the ability to go out there and do some recovery from that as well. And it's not just one type of sector as well as we look at ransomware. We've really seen ransomware popping up over the past couple of years, especially anything from higher education, financials, hospitals have been a big target here recently. We've also seen telecom, manufacturing, retail, everything that, everyone's still got a pretty high risk when it comes to ransomware. When it comes to ransomware, and we kind of group this into the cost of availability, but the cost of downtime can be significantly larger than what most people give it credit for. $80,000 is the average hourly cost of downtime. So let's say something came in, encrypted your network, and you're down for maybe even a couple of days. You can imagine how this can easily total into the multiple millions of dollars when it comes to how much you'd actually lose if you were talking about the cost of downtime. That doesn't even start to kind of take into account that if you had like a website or some sort of transaction, all the data loss that's going to be happening, all the end users that are unable to work, all their salaries start to add up pretty quickly as well. So it's definitely been a hot topic, something where people want to make sure that they close that availability gap and make sure that they have protection for all sorts of round-the-clock type issues. So as far as some ways to get rid of ransomware, there's really kind of the typical one that you would think of, pay the ransom. Most people don't want to do this, but I actually had a customer who got burnt by this. They went out there, and this was before they had Veeam. They basically paid the ransom. It was something fairly low, a couple $1,000 was all, and they then did not get their data back. They never heard from the person who actually had the encryption password. They never got the key. So they paid a ransom and got nothing from it. So that's definitely not a scenario where you want to be putting yourself into. The second one is to just restore the compromised data. This is typically going to be one of your easier options that are out there. If you have the backups locally or maybe at a secondary site, that's where you can initiate the restore from those and just take you back to the known good point. A recent customer here on this one, they actually were able to go out there and essentially all they did was they disconnected their environment from the internet, make sure that they went through a couple security protocols to make sure everything got relocked back down. And then from there, they started the restore process and had their environment back up in a couple of hours. So obviously, that's not a great scenario, getting it back in a few hours, but it is something to know that they didn't have to pay the ransom. They didn't have to go out there and actually kind of have a worst-case scenario where they were down for a couple of days or weeks or anything like that. Last thing you want to make sure you always do is make sure you contact your local crime prevention, making sure that you go to the Internet Crime Compliance Center. This is really critical so that they can try and trace this down, see where it was actually coming from, hopefully prevent this from other companies getting infected with the ransomware as well. This was a great slide because prevention really is better than the cure in most cases. In fact, you want to try and make sure that just like you were securing your home, you want to make sure you have things like an alarm. You want to make sure you have maybe some cameras out there, things to really discourage people from kind of coming in the first place. If you're the hardest one to hit with ransomware, you're probably going to be the last one that gets hit with ransomware as well. So preventing it can be a huge piece of it. There is no way to be 100% preventable, though, right? This is something where that even the most secure places could get hit. So that's why it is also important to make sure you understand that you still need to have that cure as a background option as well. So what are some of the most important things to avoid ransomware attacks? And I kind of divide this almost up into the first three and then the second two kind of making up the pairings. The first one is going to be that you need to train your staff. Staff are the number one reason, and this is a huge, probably almost 80% of why these ransomware attacks actually occur, is that someone clicks on some sort of phishing link or a payment link or anything along those lines that they got inside of an email, and that's where everything really starts from. So you need to make sure that your staff, and not just IT staff, but every single employee in the company, not only has seen and read emails about this, but maybe even goes through some more formalized options as well when it comes to the training. That way they fully know what the situation is like, what kind of problems this could cause to their company, and making sure that they know that don't open up any sort of attachments, notify what kind of viruses could be hitting the network. And if there is a virus outbreak inside the environment, you need to make sure that you have a plan of action to notify people, take the systems offline, and then be able to remediate that as well. It's also important to maybe once a year, twice a year, whatever your timeline might look like, to go out there and actually do some security testing as well. See what kind of penetration testing they can go, and see if they can actually get inside the network. Maybe they can find some old usernames and passwords on the dark web and try those. Maybe people aren't updating their passwords properly. Anything like that is a great test to be going out there and doing. You'll also want to make sure that you have the ability to keep all your software up to date. This is extremely important because so many times, I can't tell you, customers don't update Windows, they don't update a Linux server, and then some sort of vulnerability comes out, and that's where they get hit. So always make sure that you're going and keeping up to date with the newest Microsoft patches and Linux patches and everything like that inside of your environment. Now, as far as the cures, the way to go out there and actually resolve this, so when something actually does happen, you want to make sure that you back up all your software at least every single day. That could also include hourly or every couple hours or something like that as well. But every day is going to be kind of the base standard that we have to have there. We also want to make sure that you're backing up your information to a secure offsite location. This is a newer one that we've actually added into this conversation as well because of the way that the ransomware has been evolving. Recently, we've actually had some ransomware that's now smart enough to go out there and look for specific files. It looks for Veeam backup files. It looks for other types of backup software, Symantec, Commvault, whatever one you want to name. And it looks for particular files that it can go out there and encrypt that would have a higher impact on the business. So this way, having it at the offset location, maybe it's going to have some sort of disconnected connection or something that's a little bit harder for them to get access to. And this is going to be important in case everything at the primary location becomes encrypted. They still have a way to go out there and initiate the recovery. And just kind of diving into each of these just a tiny bit more detail. Again, educating the workforce is going to be the number one thing that you need to do. It's not just going to be something that the IT department needs to know. It's got to be something that every single employee, all the way up from the one or two people that are using applications to the other people that are affected with the business as well. Every single person needs to know what actually these scams look like, what the ransomware looks like, and how they can go out there and make sure that they're preventing it both on their laptops, but also the company property as well. Once we talk about that routine auditing and security, just making sure that you can check through some permissions, make sure that everything is locked down. There's a lot of third-party companies that will assist with this procedure as well. They come in, they try and get as far as they possibly can. They let you know what vulnerabilities you have out there inside of your environment. It's also really good to make sure that you're testing and kind of double checking to make sure that people don't have access to files. Even small files like things like payroll or something like that could have a big impact if someone could go out there and change that data. The releases for updates is also a critical, making sure that you're not vulnerable on that front. Just making sure that everything stays current and that there's no sort of major flaws or anything, bugs like that, where someone can get in through the back door. Backup is definitely a key part of this. You need to make sure that this is going to be something that is not accessible to everybody either. So sometimes I run into customers and they're storing their data on, like a local NAS device or something along those lines, and everyone in the company has access to that data. You definitely want to make sure that this is limited down. Maybe only a backup admin has access to that device. Try and keep it to just one or two users. And that way, if someone does come in, even maybe with a domain admin, maybe that doesn't even get access into this location. Just make sure that everything is as locked down as possible. So we talked earlier about the 3-2-1 rule, and now we'll go into a little bit more detail on what that actually entails. It's important to have 3 copies of your data. So you want to make sure that you have your production machines. You've then got a backup copy locally, and then you've got a secondary copy off-site. So with this 3 copies of data, you want at least 2 different media types as well. Now, this is because if you had, say, all one type of storage and the firmware on that storage had some sort of issue where maybe it couldn't even boot up or something like that, that's why I want 2 different media types. This could be just 2 different disk vendors. This could be the fact that there's different models, different kind of operating systems almost running on them. It could be the fact that you write to both disk and tape. So there is kind of a big mix and match there as far as what you want to use, but just having the 2 different media types is going to be extremely important there. The last of the 3-2-1 is going to be one of these being off-site. This could be tape, this could be cloud options, this could be a secondary co-location. There are a lot of different choices for this. Even things like USB rotated drives will work just fine, but you do want to make sure that one of these is going to be at an off-site location. To even talk more about offsite, a new thing that's been trending is the fact we want to make sure that one of these has what is called an air gap. So there's going to be tape, there's going to be disconnected drives, anything like that will work fine for this scenario. But we want to make sure that even if someone were able to get into the secondary location, they still wouldn't have access files. So that's kind of where the air gap policy comes into play in this as well. Just to help give it a little bit better picture on what we're talking about here. So again, you've got your virtual machines, your physical machines inside of the environment. Those are your first copy. You're backing up to disk, that's your second copy. And then cloud tape or secondary disk can be your third copy there. This really kind of helps prevent any sort of failure scenario, whether it be ransomware or anything else. You can kind of lose your entire production site to a natural disaster and still be able to recover to secondary co-location. So important rule to follow when it comes to backup, not just as it relates to ransomware, but any sort of downtime scenario. Now, one of the things that we've added onto this as well, not just the air gap copy, but also the fact that outside of the 321, you're going to also want to make sure that you have no errors. And this kind of comes down to our ability to go out there and do what we call sure backup. Sure backup is our way of doing some automated backup testing. So it's actually going to go out there, it's going to power on virtual machines from their backup files inside of an isolated testing environment. This testing environment is created by using what we call a virtual lab. Essentially just going out there, creating its own VLAN. And then from there, we boot up the virtual machines on that, and we can then power them on and verify through some different testing as part of the sure backup rules. This way, if you had backups offsite or you had backups that you were storing on one particular type of media, you can go out there and test them, make sure that there's no errors, and if something does happen, you can go out there and you can initiate a restore from those particular files as well. So again, this is talking a little bit more about the sure backup and how do you know if you actually have a good copy. So let's say you went out there and you got hit by ransomware, encrypted all your virtual machines that are out there, locked it down until you paid their ransomware. What you're able to do is actually power these machines still on the same host. So the backup files, as long as they're still in a good state, you create this on-demand sandbox, and then you can leverage that to be able to go out there and do some of the different testing on it. The basic testing is going to be to power on the virtual machine, run a heartbeat test, a ping test, and then any sort of scripting test with PowerShell that you want to add on that as well. It can also be done automatically. I recommend my customers to do this once a week or once a month or something like that, so they can go out there and test the virtual machine, make sure that everything works just like they think it should before it powers it off. This process does also send you an email report, so you will have everything kind of right there at your fingertips, knowing how the audit or security check actually went. As far as tape is one of those interesting things inside of Veeam because so many people thought tape was really dead, but it actually was implemented in Veeam version 7, and it was our #1 requested feature at the time. We really like to listen to our customers, and this is what they asked for, so we added in tape in version 7. Now we're on version 9.5 now, so 2 major releases and some minor releases have happened in those past couple of years, but to this day, tape remains our #1 most used feature. So definitely something to kind of consider. Tape isn't actually as dead as most people think it is. Tape is great for really one specific scenario. It's great for archival. So if you have to keep things for 5 years or 7 years or any sort of long-term data, that's where tape's really going to come in handy. The second great thing about tape is that it's completely isolated from your environment. Once that tape actually gets ejected and gets popped out, everything you need for that restoration of a virtual machine is on a tape at a different center. Maybe it's at Iron Mountain or something like that, where they can go out there, retrieve that tape, and be able to do the restore from that location. Veeam's tape policy is pretty standard. We basically have your tape server. It's going to have its library and drives connected to that tape server. The tape server is just another Windows box out there inside of the environment. Once we're able to detect what drives are part of what tapes are part of the library, we're then able to take those tapes and create them into a media pool. This is just a grouping of resources as it comes to go out there and be able to group up tapes so that they can kind of have a sequence on how we're going to write as far as a media set. Now, as we notice the backups that are happening on here, we'll be able to take backups from your local disk repository, and we'll kind of be able to write those down first, but then we'll be able to take those and either write incremental changes onto the tape, or we can do things like GFS policies as well, where we can go out there and we can just keep weeklies and monthlies and anything like that we might need to grab. Restores from tape will come back onto disk first. Once they've come onto disk, that's when we're going to be able to restore those blocks back into the virtual environment or physical environment to get those machines back to wherever they need to go. The other key here to getting backups offsite is going to be backup copy jobs. So this is going to be just copying to a secondary disk location. It could actually be on-site or off-site, makes no real difference to us, but just making sure that you follow the 3-2-1 rule is really what's going to be critical here. As we talk about offsite options, this could be any type of disk that you can come up with. So direct attached storage, NAS devices are pretty popular, local storage, JBOD setups, anything like that will work just fine under Veeam software. So once you're doing something like a backup copy job, what you'll notice here is that we'll be able to transfer just the incremental blocks. So it's actually going to function very similar to the traditional tape route, where you can go out there and see what's actually changed, be able to reduce that data down, and send the data to an offsite location. We can also add in things like WAN acceleration. If you want a very slow or latent connection in between sites, we can go out there and make sure that we can transfer across those slow speed connections, kind of utilizing as little bandwidth as possible. Now, as we talk about going off-site, one of the things we can do with off-site as well is that we can use cloud. So we do have cloud vendors out there that are going to be able to offer up the ability for you to transfer from your location to their site. It works nearly identical to what we just saw for backup copy. In fact, it even uses a backup copy job. The only real difference here is that it uses a non-persistent connection. So it's actually going to be able to connect from your location to the cloud provider when it needs to send data. It connects through what's called the cloud gateway, that bridge we see there. This cloud gateway is just essentially a public-facing computer. It's going to have a public IP address. That's going to be what you would use to connect to via username and password. We'll then use a single SSL connection, so it is going to be encrypted while the data is transferring from one site to another, so that we can go out there and transfer the data from your backup repository to the cloud provider's location. The cloud provider can have multi-tenancy as well, so they could be using a really large storage, some direct attached storage or something like that might be hundreds of terabytes, and then they're able to divvy that up into each of the customers that they're going to be supporting. So customer A maybe gets a couple terabytes, customer B maybe needs more, and C and D and things like that, they can go and have whatever types of storage that you need at the cloud provider site. This can also work with WAN acceleration as well. So even though we've added in the cloud gateway and the cloud storage, we can still go out there and utilize WAN acceleration. This works for both just standard files or backup files as well. We can be able to transfer these from one location to another. It's also designed to handle slower or latent connections as well, so it does have multiple streams. But if you did have some sort of connection that was not very stable, we can still work with those to be able to go out there and back up to your cloud provider's location. Another thing to think about when it comes to doing a restore is that you have a lot of options inside of Veeam. And this is something that a lot of customers overlook, is that you don't always have to restore the entire thing. You could go out there and do granular recovery. So you could do databases, you could do just Windows files, you could do a spreadsheet or PDF that got encrypted. You can kind of restore whatever different components it might be that you're looking for. We work with storage snapshots as well with a few different vendors. So different vendors like Nimble as well as NetApp, and there's a couple other ones to take a look at in that fact as well. We can restore from storage snapshots, we can restore from the repository, we can restore from offsite locations or tape. So we really have all the same restores no matter where you're going to be restoring this from. Now, as far as kind of what you could do, full VM recovery, file of recovery, application data, exchange emails, all those will be available as well for types of restores. Now, a couple of things to think about when it comes to making sure that you're protected against something like ransomware. Another product that we mentioned is called Veeam One, and this is really more of a monitoring and reporting solution, but it has two really key factors when it comes to ransomware. The first one is that we have what's called the Protected Machines Report, and this will actually go out there and tell you which virtual machines actually have been protected and meet your SLA requirements and which ones haven't. It also has another alarm that's built into the software as well, and it's going to be for ransomware specifically. What it's looking for is lots of change rate, lots of things happening on a virtual machine, high CPU usage, high network usage, lots of random I/O and things like that happening. And as soon as we detect that, we're going to send you an alarm, just so maybe that you can go out there and maybe power that machine off, make sure that it doesn't encrypt any other machines that are out there, and hopefully give you a little bit of a heads up to be able to go out there and prevent this from going out there and hitting your entire environment. So that's how we can protect you on the virtual machines. And I mentioned physical out there as well. Physical uses what we call our Veeam agents. So for endpoint, this is going to be servers as well as workstations. We can go out there and use these agents for your protection there. The exact same things apply here. The only difference is that our backup product is going to be using all snapshots inside of VMware and Hyper-V, whereas our endpoint protections can actually require an agent to be installed on the location where you're backing up. This could also work for cloud workloads as well. So if you have machines that are running inside of Azure, inside of AWS, where you don't have access to the hypervisor, there's some sort of abstraction layer happening there. This is where you can go out there and use some of those different agent components to be able to back up those machines. Even if those got hit by ransomware, you would have some sort of out to those as well. This shows a little bit more detail on the different offerings that Veeam has out there. So we talked mostly today about backup replication, which is part of our Veeam availability suite. We talked just briefly about the agents, and we break our agents down into an agent for Windows and agent for Linux. And those are all kind of controlled and encompassed by the Veeam availability console. And there's a few other components out there as well, some of our integrations and things like that you'll see here too. So as we talk about the availability and really what our goal is with this messaging around availability, it's that we can recover any machine within 15 minutes or less for all sort of RTPO options that we have. So it's going to be combining both recovery time and recovery point objectives, making sure that the SLA that we can get for all applications is going to be 15 minutes or less. This is really critical when it comes to ransomware because as you can imagine, 15 minutes of data loss on one or two machines if ransomware were to hit, probably not the end of the world. Might be a little bit difficult, people might complain, but you're basically going to be able to go out there and recover that pretty quickly. If you had multiple days or hours or something like that worth of downtime, that's where things start to get a little bit trickier. We also want to make sure that you have complete workload mobility. This is really important for us to be able to go out there and be able to make sure that you could go to any cloud, any location, whether it be a cloud provider, whether it be a public cloud. We want to make sure that you just have the flexibility that if you lost your entire environment to ransomware, you can go out there into a new secure location at the cloud provider and be able to recover everything that you might need. It's also really important to us in our availability messaging that we have both compliance and visibility. We want to make sure that you can go out there and be able to monitor on your virtual machines, see what's actually protected, give you reports based around that, and then the ability to go out there and have things like, are you meeting SLAs? Are you going out there and actually meeting standards that you have set for your compliance and things as far as the requirements inside of your business. I have one last success story that I want to talk about here, and this was one with the Bedford School. And this is an education department, and obviously someone went out there and a faculty member clicked on some sort of phishing scam and essentially affected their computer and then propagated itself to additional computers out there. It was essentially just going out and encrypting every single file that it could find. As a school, obviously, they deal with really tight budgets. Paying a fee, completely not going to happen. Not something they could even come up with that kind of money on a short amount of time. Now, when this happened, they were obviously losing work. They were losing the fact that students couldn't do anything. Teachers couldn't teach lessons. So it became a really large issue. If they thought about rebuilding, kind of creating every single machine back over again, that could take hours or days or maybe even longer than that, maybe even weeks or months to actually go out there and recreate their entire environment. So they were able to go out there. This is the one that actually disconnected their environment from the internet, made sure that the security team was able to get back in, make sure that they could kind of lock some of this information down, really limit down the amount of users that could actually have access inside of the environment. Then they started using Veeam to go out there and do restores. They essentially just went out there and restored all of their VMDK files, and they had no ransomware that they actually had to pay. They didn't actually have to pay the ransom there at the end. So this was a really important thing to them. They actually were doing daily backups, so they were able to go back to a time that was a few hours ago, but something that was still acceptable for their teachers and their faculty, especially when it comes to what the alternatives were. So a really easy process for them. They really love the software for being able to go out there and initiate recovery options. And I just want to kind of take a second to show out some of the other resources that we have available. We have a full resource library full of white papers and other product demos and things like that available on our website. So it's veeam.com/whitepapers if you're interested in some of the different options that are out there. And lastly, I'll open up the floor for any sort of questions. I don't see any that have come in at this time, but if you guys do have any questions for either myself or Josh with 5S Technologies, more than happy to answer any questions that we possibly can. I do want to thank everyone for attending this webinar, and I'll stick around for a few more minutes to answer any sort of questions.
Well, we certainly appreciate everybody being able to join today. Thank you so much for your time, and I will follow up with a survey to see to get your opinions on the webinar. I certainly appreciate it, and I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you, Stu.